The workplace is a great setting to try and promote physical activity, but it's almost the most difficult setting in which to promote physical activity.
So, Dr. Gemma Ryde, welcome to Stress Free Longevity. I think just a useful place to start, if you don't mind, is just to give our listeners a little introduction to you, where you work, and what your interests are.
Yeah, of course. So I am a senior lecturer at the University of Glasgow. So I run an MSc program in sport and exercise science and medicine, but I also have research interests within physical activity, and mainly within workplace physical activity, health and well-being.
So, I think this is a great topic. So, let's just jump right in if you're okay with that. So, why is doing physical activity in the workplace potentially a good idea?
Well, as you could appreciate, we spend an awful lot of our time at work. So at the moment, we're looking at about 75% of UK adults aged 16 to 64 are in employment. So if you're working full time, say, I don't know, 35, 40 hours a week, 5 days a week, then it's about a quarter of your week that you are in this setting. So we have the potential to reach a large number of people in this time. Um, and a lot of workplaces are incredibly sedentary. So probably over the last 60 years, we've increased the amount of technology and mechanization in workplaces. So even active occupations are less active than they used to be. But I think again, most of us spend a lot of time at computers. Most industries have somebody who's sitting at a computer at a desk as their main part of their job. So jobs have actually become more sedentary during this time as well. So we really do need to look at movement in this setting. Uh, but it's quite often called the ideal setting in which to be active, which I tend to disagree with. So, workplace and employees aren't captive audiences. They're adults with opinions and decisions to make themselves. So they're not a group of people who are just going to be sit there and told what to do. So if you look at the school, for example, we tend to promote physical activity in that setting because it's kind of like the workplace for kids, and it tends to work quite well because kids will typically give or take, do as they're told. But there's very few examples of where a workplace doesn't have an employee who's got a degree of autonomy or an opinion, or they don't have to do activity. So just an employer saying you should be active with providing you with this, there's still this degree of control from an employee whether they choose to be active or not. So I think a workplace is a great setting to try and promote physical activity, but it's almost the most difficult setting in which to promote physical activity.
Well, let's talk about some of the benefits. Let's start with the organization. What are the potential benefits to the company?
Yeah, so if you've got an employee who is not that physically active, so low levels of physical activity, it's associated with a lot of factors which workplaces are really interested in, like reduced productivity, and that's the quality and the quantity of work that an employee produces, increased absenteeism, so they're off sick more, higher healthcare costs, disability, work impairments, musculoskeletal problems, the list really goes on. Um, on the flip side, employees who are physically active tend to be more healthier and more productive across the board. Um, we also know there's huge kind of benefits to employers who introduce physical activity initiatives and kind of workplace wellbeing initiatives. And some of them might not actually be as obvious as making employees healthier. It's related to things like job satisfaction and improved mood. So actually having these additional resources and benefits and perks for employees makes them more committed to the workplace. Um, Especially in today's really competitive job market, I would say that providing these kind of opportunities is a really key way to get to attract top candidates, improve recruitment and retention of workers. All the value adds that when we've got really strong financial challenges in workplaces at the moment, these additional benefits I think shouldn't be overlooked by workplaces.
And then presumably there's some benefits to the individual. Do you mind just giving a wee comment on that as well?
Yeah, I think most of us know that there's a wide range of benefits for the individual from being physically active. So, when we look at the World Health Organization's definition of health, they talk about physical health, mental health, and social health as well. So, physical activity hits every single one of those. So, we know people who are physically active, they live longer, helps prevent major diseases and conditions. It helps people manage major conditions and diseases. It helps with anxiety and depression, as I've said before, about improved mood. And you get that instant kind of kick from being physically active for mental health. So you get that instant endorphin kind of rush and that feel good factor. But there's also social benefits as well for individuals. So we know when people are active, a lot of people do activity together, or they do it in groups. And we know that kind of social side can really help reduce loneliness. Again, it helps with the mental health aspect as well. And it's good to be socially connected, and physical activity can help with those. I think also an important thing to acknowledge is the fact that a lot of us at the moment do get our activity in leisure time. And if we get our physical activity in during the working day or during work hours, it means that we free up time out with work hours to do other things that we might be interested in as well. So I think there are additional benefits to employees from having workplace-based physical activity initiatives. So freeing up time, I think, is one, and also that sense of achievement that you've gained health benefits whilst at work, to allow you to use your time for other discretionary opportunities.
So this all sounds perfect, but there's clearly barriers to implementation. So what are those? Well, like, why are people not doing this more?
Yeah, I think one of the main issues that we have with trying to do physical activity in work time specifically, or linked to the workplace, is the fact that the workplace was not meant to be for physical activity a lot of the time. So it takes people away from productive tasks. So an employer is paying that individual to be there to do a specific task, and that task is not being physically active. So it's the hardest sales pitch you can try and do to say, right, say, let's talk about desk-based employees. I want your employee to come away and do 15 minutes of activity during the 8 hours that they're there with you. And I think that's quite a hard sell because they're losing time from that employee technically on paper. Obviously, we can see that a lot of the evidence suggests that if employees are active, they are then more productive. But it's still a very difficult conversation to have with workplaces to say, well, actually, if you give them this opportunity, this time, whatever it might be, that they could become more active. I also think that there's a huge cultural issue within the UK. So we did some work, some qualitative work, where we asked um, managers and individuals in the organization what they would think about if we gave them 15 minutes of paid time a day to be physically active. And we thought this was really, the answer. We thought we were going to get some great information back. And what we found was more barriers than solutions. So there was a real cultural ingrained culture that I'm here to work. Even employers think that, employees think that, sorry, when they're at the desk, they go, well, I'm here to get my job done. I want to get home and I've got childcare responsibilities, I've got these other kind of things. So if I give that 15 minutes in work time, my work's not going to change. Like I'm still going to have that workload. So there's a real concern that actually it's not actually extra time for activity. It's, that there's other kind of issues there. So I think we are facing a significant cultural barrier about norms and perceptions about being active at work. Wearing, say, if you can do activity in any clothing that you're wearing, but typically you want to wear a pair of trainers or something comfortable if you're walking. But are there jobs where you're not allowed to wear trainers, where that's not a good thing to have the kind of clothing on that you need to be active? So I think we face a huge amount of barriers within the workplace, largely around culture, expectations, and norms.
So just thinking culturally, are there countries around the world that do adopt physical activity into the workplace?
Yeah, there are a few examples out there of countries which seem to be kind of bucking the trend. I would say the UK is very much the norm, but for example, in Singapore, it's quite expected of employees in the morning to go in and have a group activity session, and to do 15 minutes of it's normally something like yoga or tai chi or something kind of quite holistic. It's not across the board, but they do seem to have a lot more of an acceptance that you can come to the workplace and kind of be active. I think there's also a lot of different policy and legislation across the board which make a difference for this sort of thing. So I was going to mention some of the things we've got in the UK. So when we've tried to put in workplace physical activity initiatives in place, as soon as a very health and safety style issue comes up within a workplace, all the well-being stuff, all the kind of health promotion stuff goes out the window largely. Um, so for example, I remember doing some health and well-being checks for employees with the plan that we would kind of come up with this physical activity initiative. And then it's an international bank that I was working for, and then they made everybody redundant. So they had huge redundancies across the board, and all the kind of health and wellbeing initiatives we had decided to put in place went on the back burner. Um, and another example is looking at health and safety advisors, for example, these people who are largely responsible for workplace well-being. So that it tends to sit in human resources, and kind of health and safety managers. When you have a workplace incident that comes up, for example, a brick falls on somebody's foot, you have to report it by law to the health and safety executive. Um, so you have a legal responsibility to look after an employee's kind of health and well-being. But when you look at the legislative responsibilities with regards to something like stress, for example, is that you have a legal responsibility as a workplace to make sure that stress is being managed, or to protect employees from stress, but it's not reportable to the health and safety executive. So I think in the UK, there is a priority placed on other things. And I think that's maybe one of the issues that we're always going to face until well-being with employees is taken more seriously. Then I think we're always going to face barriers to being physically active in the workplace and other health initiatives.
So, are there any companies that do it well? And feel free to give a shout out to some of those companies. Any examples that we can draw on?
So obviously, I'm based in the UK. I'm based in Scotland. I do quite a lot of work with some local organisations who do tend to do it well. And I think the first thing I would say is that anybody who's doing something in a workplace to do with health promotion, physical activity, is doing better than most. So I think it's important to acknowledge that even if you're doing what you think is the smallest thing, it'll be better than most workplaces are. But the ones who tend to do it better either have a lead, somebody who is like a manager, or somebody who's responsible for the workplace who is interested in health and physical activity, or an organization, for example, that promotes health and physical activity. In Scotland, we have an organisation called Paths for All, who are they deliver the Scottish Government's walking strategy, and they practice what they preach. So they are delivering health initiatives and walking initiatives throughout Scotland, and I used to work for them, so I know as an employee as well that we had time to go for a walk. Like workplace walking meetings were just the done thing in that workplace. So that very much became, it was an expected culture. But that, I think that really does buck the trend on what we see in other workplaces in the UK. But it's their job to promote health at a national level. So it didn't make sense for them not to lead by example, if that makes sense. There are some examples out there of workplaces who are trying to provide employees with the opportunities to be physically active. So actually for decades now, there's been workplaces who've provided gym facilities within their workplace. And this is something which means that the employee has that physical opportunity. They've got the physical kind of environment there to be active whilst they're at work. And I think that is something that a lot of workplaces could look to do, or if they're redesigning, or if you've got new buildings going in place, that's brought in as something that they have is an opportunity to, like a gym or a room where employees can be physically active. So I think that's one good thing that's been going on for quite some time, that workplaces can do. I think it's interesting though with the shift towards home working, and then what is your physical environment in which you're working. So my example, I guess, with the gym kind of side of things is that I get subsidized gym membership through my workplace, which is great, and I take advantage of that. But I now work from home, which is away from where my gym was, and so I've had to switch gyms. So I now have a local gym where I go, and it's not subsidized. Because I can't use the one that my employer can endorse. So I'll put a wee caveat in there, is that we are actually within the workplace physical activity research world, and in the workplace world in general, I think still looking at these new opportunities which could be coming up to promote physical activity within the working home as well as the workplace setting as well.
So, how do we incentivize and motivate staff? Presuming there was buy in, how do
Mm.
we encourage people to do it? It was very interesting that you mentioned there that there was paid time and it didn't really transfer into actual people using it. But tell me a little bit about ways that we might be able to encourage staff to participate in some sort of physical activity at work.
Yeah, I think one of the key things to reiterate is the fact that doing something is definitely better than nothing, and lots of workplaces have a very different level of resources available to them. Um, so I've obviously been doing research into this area for many years now, and it's hard for me to when I look at a workplace, I look at it as the whole. So I'm trying to almost think blue sky about what we can do across the board there. So my levels of thoughts in this area have moved on to things that are trying to address these bigger barriers, the culture and the kind of the systems in which people are at work, and see how we can make them better for physical activity. Because there's obviously lots of initiatives like step count challenges and walking groups at work and all these other kind of things that you can do. But I think we're moving along to adding on to that sort of thing, things like you know rewards, financial rewards, and the 4-day working week has been one that I'm very interested in, which I've not done any research in at the moment. But there's some suggestion that giving people working 4-day week but being paid for your full time um, can give people the opportunity to be more physically active. I think we need to do a lot more research into that. There's some suggestion. There was a report done. It wasn't. I think it was a case study that said that people who work 4 days but paid for 5 exercise more frequently, increase exercise sessions by about 6 minutes per session, um, which I think is a really interesting thing to look at. If you just give people the time to do something, but you don't take their pay away, do they then use that for physical activity? Or yeah, having 30 minutes a week, which is specifically labeled for physical activity. And that's the concept that we spoke to employees around. And I think it was that concern of, yeah, but is somebody going to come and do that 30 minutes of work for me? Like who's gonna take that time and actually make sure that my work gets done? Because what they're worried about is spending that 30 minutes a week or 15 minutes a day, whatever it might be, being active, and then their workload hasn't actually shifted. What we tend to find in reality is that that person comes back fresher, boosted with energy, and more productive. So they don't actually lose the 15 minutes. They actually, and you'll feel it yourself. We do it intuitively. We'll be like, "Oh gosh, I'm exhausted. I need to step away from this kind of situation." And you come back and you manage to solve the problem that you'd been mulling over for ages. But I think it's again very difficult for us to try and convince employees and workplaces that will be the case all the time if they put this investment in both individually and as a workplace. 15 minutes of time every day is quite, it adds up. That's a cost to that. So trying to provide the evidence to them that that cost, the benefit is worth it, is something that we're working on at the moment.
I can imagine about 6 months ago, before I started this podcast, that I would have assumed in my head that trying to do physical activity at work would take time and effort. Oh, I'll need half an hour. There'll need to be a gym. There'll need to be something. But in all the interviews I've done so far on exercise, there's been a common theme, and that is the small movements throughout the day are important. Those little exercise snacks, they add up and they have health benefits. That seems to be quite universal in all my interviews. So, is there the potential to include activity in the workplace which doesn't demand as much time? And of course, there's these high intensity things that we can pack more into shorter amounts of time if time is a big limiting factor. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I definitely think there's a large body of research which is still developing, looking at this idea of kind of exercise snacks or kind of boosts within the day, which is very short kind of duration. Um, and I think the key thing to get across is that anything is better than nothing. So if you've been sitting down sedentary all day and you replaced 1 minute of that with 1 minute of activity, that's obviously going to be better than having that 1 minute extra sitting down. So I think even short amounts of activity are beneficial to our health, of any intensity as well, because yes, if you then spent that 1 minute, a couple of minutes doing something very high intensity, you probably will get more benefit than doing something at light intensity, but light intensity would be better than nothing. So there is a real spectrum there. And I think it's important for employees and workplaces to know um, that any sort of movement is kind of better than nothing. Um, so it doesn't need to be these larger chunks of time, even like, 10 minutes, 15 minutes is still quite a lot of your day when you kind of parcel it up. But if you were, you know, say, for example, waiting for going to get a cup of tea or waiting for the kettle to boil, you can quite easily add in some activity in there. Some people, I know people to do kind of heel raises and balance activities or squats while they're waiting for the kettle to boil at work, which is something that they would do anyway. Some people like to walk to a printer further away within a building just to get extra steps in the day. I think one of the classic examples of workplace physical activity initiatives is stair climbing. So, getting yourself up to your office or moving around at work, there's normally for most of us staircases somewhere that we will have to take. And choosing to take the stairs, which maybe take you a minute, can have a huge benefit because I think if, once I've climbed 4 flights of stairs, my heart rate's certainly up. I think for most people, that's enough to really increase your activity levels on a small, almost like microdosing, like you're just having little bits along the way. And all of that we know can add up to have beneficial effects, not just instantly on our health and how we feel, but longer term, they can have a beneficial effect on longer term health outcomes.
Yeah, another common theme has been intensity in all of these interviews that I've done. I guess there's ways to just increase your intensity. If you're going to go to a place, go a little bit quicker. If you're going to go up the stairs, just jog up 1 flight of stairs. I guess those are just packing it into little shorter amounts.
Yeah, I think if you're going to get the best bang for your buck for the short amount of time you're putting in, the harder you work during that time, the more benefit you're going to gain. So there's a body of research coming out looking at some large kind of epidemiological studies of vigorous intensity activity within lifestyle activity. So an activity that you're doing anyway, like going for the bus or walking up the stairs. If you can do that at a faster pace or a higher intensity, that that will give you additional benefit. So if you are going to only have a short amount of time, I think adding in more speed into that or higher intensity work will give you greater benefits. And I think that's something we forget about actually, that you don't always need to add in lots of extra time or facilities and equipment. Look at what you're already doing and how do you get the most benefit out of things that you've already got as a habit in your lifestyle and just making them work more for you.
So, is there a way to incentivize companies to do this? I don't know if you can like award good companies or shame bad companies, but is there a way that we can encourage companies to adopt healthier practices?
Yeah, there's definitely been examples in the UK anyway of healthy work awards, where employers can show that they have done certain things within the workplace, make sure that they've got, good policies and practice in place, and allow them to be badged with an award, say we are a gold workplace for employee health. And I think that is desirable, because especially I definitely think as a younger generation coming into the workplace, that that could be the difference between them going to work for one employer over another, because they know that the employer is actually caring about their health. Um, but yeah, I think there's definitely more that can be done. I think it's the argument between providing financial support and an incentive for workplaces for employee health and the benefit that the workplace gets, and for example, the government or nationally that we get is a challenging one. But I definitely think that if we can try and incentivize workplaces to focus on employee health, then it might even just be enough for a few to be provided with the resources and put the time in to make their workplaces more active. And I think that'd be especially the case in small to medium enterprises. So bearing in mind the UK, the majority of workplaces are small to medium enterprises. So, you're talking 50, 250 people, like small groups of people. And if they could just have a little bit of financial support or some kind of break in something that they're having to pay, or these sorts of things might really add up for them and making a difference for their workforce if they could have the time and capacity and resources to be able to invest in employees' health. Because as I've said before, a lot of the things we do to do with employee health and well-being often get overlooked when real kind of more pressing health and safety issues come up. So we've really got to show that there is a value for this other side, and we know that the argument's there. Healthier employees are more productive, but it's a harder case to sell, and I think there's a lot more we could do to make that case more appealing.
So, if there's anyone listening, either a very motivated staff member or potentially someone representing the company, a CEO of a small enterprise or whatever, who kind of likes the idea of this and is thinking about maybe implementing it in their workplace, what are some of the key considerations if trying to roll something like this out?
Yeah, I think one of the key things is to get the employees on board. Um, I think there's a lot of the time that these decision things are made at meetings without consultation of the employees it's gonna actually affect, and so my first step when I go into a workplace and do research or doing anything like this or to advise workplaces is engage with your employees. So, it doesn't take much, and any workplace could, do this, have an hour with their employees where they kinda go, "Okay, look, we want to do something physical activity. Um, what would help us do this? Tell me your opinion. What stops you from being active in work? What would help you be active at work? What needs to change to be active at work?" And I think it's a really cheap place to start, to be honest. That's a really low cost thing that you can do. And it's important that employees are engaged for two reasons. Number one, you're going to get a list of things that you can do and implement, which are specific to your workplace, and more likely to stick than just reading the "what can I do within workplace" blogs that you kind of find. But also that the employees will likely be more engaged in that process because you've asked them. Um, After that, I would look at what they've said and look at what is feasible with the resources and the time constraints that you have, and look at then maybe what needs to be parked or is unachievable, and to feed that back to them to show you have listened. Say, "We heard this, great ideas, we've got zero money. But these things we think we can do, they might not be your biggest bang for buck solutions, but we can implement them. So let's give it a go." And I think just something really simple like that is something that a lot of workplaces it could do. And also at those kind of discussions with employees, you're gonna find somebody as I kind of call them spark plugs. You're gonna find that innovator, that person who's really engaged in this sort of thing, who you could task with taking this forward. So, yeah, having a wellness lead, having somebody there who is going to champion some of the work that you're doing, somebody that the employees, that if it comes from the employee base, it's not coming from management necessarily, that they're more likely to relate to them and listen to them, that it's somebody like them. And I think that's a really, really key thing. And I think that's a really simple place to start when you're looking at beginning the journey of implementing more physical activity within the workplace. I think another key consideration is not just having the employees involved and having their say, but is to kind of hit all levels of the hierarchy. So quite often we'll have a chief executive or somebody kind of high up in the organization who's very much supportive of this. They're keen at activity. They do a lot themselves, and they go, "Yeah, okay, come on in. Let's do some stuff in this workplace. We want to get something going." We speak to employees and they're very motivated and keen. They manage to convince more employees to get involved. And then there's a group maybe of people in the middle of this kind of hierarchy who also need to be brought along in the process as well. So we've identified that actually speaking to middle managers and having them, people who are directly responsible for the day-to-day running of an organization, are absolutely pivotal to things working and not working. So if you find that there is a barrier within any kind of group within the workplace, that's actually getting them on board is going to be essential. So providing them with training and getting their opinions. It might even be the case of, I think your workplace a lot of the time as well. When we go into workplaces, we learn about the structure very, very quickly, and we know who the key people that we need to leverage to have things, to get things to happen, or an area where they might be getting blocked. It's good to identify those and make sure that they're on board as well. So providing them with training and knowledge and information, and making sure that they are invested in the process as well, is really essential.
And I would imagine motivation and sustainability becomes an issue, even from an individual level. We've all joined gyms and we struggle to maintain it after a few months. Any thoughts on, say, you do implement really good practices in the workplace. How do you keep that going?
Yeah, I think that's why I focus so much on structure, and policies and practices that we can do, looking at not just necessarily a thing like a gym membership or this type of activity or activity class being delivered, because that's not as important as having these foundations in place, which are going to mean that physical activity initiatives are taken more seriously longer term, that they need to become ingrained in workplaces. So I think that's the key to longer term sustainability, is having physical activity as a priority within the workplace, and making sure that, one of the things I always ask workplaces is there somebody whose job role this could be to carry this forward as part of their job, not as a nice thing to do, not as an additional thing that they have to do outside the job because they're the nice person and they're the keen person in the workplace, and they do it out of the goodness of their heart. Take this seriously if this is what you want to do. You've had some initial good examples of change within your workplace. You've seen some benefit. So now put your money money where your mouth is, and actually maybe incorporate this into a job role so that it's got longer term sustainability. I think, incentivizing is an important aspect of that. But again, all these they do tend to be quite short term. And what we're keen on is really longer term investment in this, and that has to be happening at a higher workplace structural level, and not just individual motivation will always fluctuate. Um, People change jobs as well. That's sort of quite often we find we get the spark plugs in the workplace and they're really keen innovators and they leave. And then your workplace initiative falls flat. But if it's built into a structure, like a job role, that next person will take on that job role. So I think that's really important for workplaces to look at longevity, is to think, if I'm serious about this, it needs to be somehow into my organizational systems to allow it to not just disappear off when people change job or motivation is lacking.
If a company was wanting to implement some structured exercise, obviously we spoke about, those exercise snacks. You can do things without adding or taking away any time from the workplace. But say you wanted to implement some actual, we're going to have some defined time in the day to do some actual physical activity. Is there a good time of day to do it? Obviously the one that I was thinking of was, after lunch, you've got that afternoon slump. Has there been any work done or any suggestions about when might be the best time in the day to do something?
Yeah, we've definitely looked into this, and there's research in this area. I think it's harder to focus on that side of things when I always say I don't really care what people do and when, as long as they're being active at some point, they will get the benefit. But when you want to look at it in a more nuanced way, then actually the icing on the cake is putting it in at certain time points. And as you say, we all know, once you've eaten, if you can do a couple of minutes of activity after that, that will help with keeping you awake at work afterwards. So, there is obviously research that's looked at providing somebody with foods and then getting them to do various activities afterwards, and which one has the best response on the blood glucose levels. Um, so yeah, we know that if you can do activity after eating, that it is a beneficial time to be active. And like I said, it can only be a couple of minutes. So even doing 2 minutes of activity or 5 minutes after you've had your lunch, walking a further distance from where you've had your lunch back to your desk or something could be enough, just to make sure that you're a little bit more, had a bit more of an energy boost when you get back into the workplace. But there's also some really interesting work coming out looking at stress in the workplace, and when we can maybe have physical activity breaks to try and be beneficial for stress. So, is it the case that if somebody is active before work, so coming into work, that they start the day at a higher level of kind of stress resilience, that they've started from a very good place. They're not coming into work low and demotivated and things. They've actually got themselves into a positive mood place because they've done physical activity. And what effect does that have on productivity and resilience to stress, and all these kind of other aspects throughout the day? I think there's good a good case to look at implementing physical activity at various time points, depending on what outcome you're interested in. I think the stress side of things at work is really key, and musculoskeletal pain as well. So, if you are feeling uncomfortable at work, if you're feeling your back is telling you it is sore, don't wait until your 15-minute break. in a certain amount of time, if you've got the choice, you should get up at that time point to do something active for that pain. Because that pain is not going to get better if you keep doing the position that you're in. So I think looking at cues from the body is a good time to look at putting in physical activity. Not necessarily around a time point in the day, but adapting to what your body's actually telling you that it needs.
Dr. Gemma Ryde, I think we have come to the end. Thank you so much for your time. We usually finish by just offering the speaker a last opportunity just to leave the listeners with any final thoughts or comments.
Yeah, I think my kind of take homes would be that there's huge benefits to being physically active, to both the workplace and to the individual. And actually, it doesn't matter necessarily when you're physically active, but we know that if we can get it within the working day, if we can get it within the workplace and make those connections, that you guaranteed to get that benefit for employees instead of sending them on the way and assuming they're going to find extra time for it elsewhere. Because I think we all struggle with motivation. But it's also key for workplaces to know that anything you do is largely going to be a good thing. So even if you can only provide, you know, a very small token gesture to your employees, then hopefully that's going to have some kind of benefit. But the more we can do, the more structural, the more serious we can take it, the more likely it is to take hold within the workplace. But also to, like I said, work with your employees on this. Like it shouldn't be one person's job, health and well-being initiatives and physical activity in the workplace, that we need to look at using in our wider kind of workforce there and bring everybody along the way in this journey. They're more likely to have a workplace that is physically active if everybody is signed up to that concept.
Dr. Gemma Ryde, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you.